The flashing red and blue lights cut through the night like a knife, painting the wet pavement in alternating streaks of color. Darius Coleman sat on the ground, hands laced behind his head, his breathing shallow and controlled the way he'd learned in basic training. The cold seeped through his threadbare jeans as the officer's boot nudged his thigh. "Stay put! Hands where I can see them!" the cop barked, though Darius hadn't moved an inch. His ribs still throbbed from where they'd slammed him against the squat car. Standard procedure. They'd called it when he'd gasped in pain. The arrest had happened fast. 1 minute he'd been sitting outside Benny's diner, savoring the half-stale turkey sandwich the night cook had slipped him through the back door. The next, shouting erupted from the alley across the street. A white man in a business suit staggered out, clutching his bleeding nose, pointing directly at Darius. "That's him! That's the guy who robbed me!" Darius had barely gotten to his feet when 2 officers materialized, their hands already resting on their holsters. No questions. No witnesses. Just the familiar dance he'd seen play out a dozen times before. Now in the interrogation room, the detective slid a grainy black and white photo across the chipped formica table. This looked familiar. Darius squinted. The surveillance image showed a blurry figure in a dark hoodie exiting an alley. No visible face. No distinguishing features. Just a shadow with limbs. "That could be anyone," Darius said, his voice steady despite the dryness in his throat. The detective smirked, tapping the photo with a thick finger. "Victim says it was a black male about your height. You were the only one in the area. I was eating a sandwich 2 blocks away when it happened. Convenient story." The detective leaned back, the chair creaking under his weight. "You got anyone who can verify that?" Darius thought of the diner cook, Miguel, who'd risked his job just giving him leftovers. He thought of his rap sheet. 2 misdemeanors for sleeping in abandoned buildings when the shelters were full. He thought of how quickly the system labeled men like him, homeless, black, veteran, as disposable. The door swung open before he could answer. A harried-looking man in a wrinkled suit bustled in, flipping through a file folder. His tie was loosened, his hair disheveled like he'd been running his hands through it all night. "Darius Coleman? Mark Renshaw, public defender." He didn't offer a handshake. "Let's talk." As Renshaw dropped into the chair beside him, Darius caught the scent of stale coffee and cheap aftershave. But it was the man's eyes that told him everything. Weary, distracted, already defeated. This wasn't a defender. This was a bureaucrat marking time until his next case. The fluorescent lights in the consultation room buzzed like angry insects, casting a sickly glow over the peeling paint and scratch table. Renshaw spread out the case file with the practiced motion of someone who'd done this too many times before. "Let's not sugarcoat this," he began, not meeting Darius's eyes. "Your situation isn't great." Darius watched as Renshaw's finger traced the police report. The detective had written that Darius fit the description, that magical phrase that turned every black man into a suspect. "The victim positively identified you," Renshaw continued. "From 50 feet away in the dark." Darius's hands clenched into fists under the table. He saw a black guy in a hoodie and pointed at the first one he found. Renshaw sighed, rubbing his temples. "Even if that's true, who's going to testify for you?" "The cook who gave you that sandwich. You think he'll risk his job for a homeless vet?" The words hung in the air between them. Darius thought of the VA hospital that had turned him away when the nightmares got too bad. The shelter that had banned him after one panic attack. The way people crossed the street when they saw his army jacket and unkempt beard. "They're offering a deal," Renshaw said, sliding a paper across the table. "Plead guilty to misdemeanor assault. 6 months, likely out in 4 with good behavior." Darius stared at the document. The letters swam before his eyes. 6 months for a crime he didn't commit. 6 months of his life gone because it was easier than fighting. "And if I say no?" Renshaw finally looked at him, not with pity but with the impatience of a man who'd already moved on mentally to his next case. "Then we go to trial with a public defender's office budget and a jury that'll take one look at your record and that surveillance photo. You're looking at 5 years if you lose." The pen felt like a lead weight in Darius's hand. He thought about the cell waiting for him, the way the system ground down men like him, the way no one would care either way. With a hand that only shook slightly, he signed his name. The prison doors clanged shut behind Darius with a finality that echoed in his bones. The intake processing had been a blur of fingerprints, mugshots, and humiliating searches. Now he stood in Block C, holding a thin mattress and a set of scratchy orange scrubs. "Coleman, you're in 23B, the guard barked, not looking up from his clipboard. The cell block smelled of sweat, industrial cleaner, and something darker underneath, the sour tang of hopelessness. Inmates watched him pass with varying expressions. Some nodded. Fellow veterans, he guessed, recognizing the look in his eyes. Others sized him up like predators scenting fresh meat. His cell was a 6x9 concrete box with 2 bunks, a stainless steel toilet, and walls covered in layers of graffiti. His cellmate was a wiry Latino man in his 50s with tattoos covering his arms. "Ray," the man said by way of greeting, not looking up from his crossword puzzle. "Darius." He set his mattress on the top bunk. "Plea deal?" Ray asked, still focused on his puzzle. "Yeah. Public defender." Darius paused. "How'd you know?" Ray finally looked up, his smile revealing a missing incisor. "They got that shit down to a science, Hamano. You black, broke, or both. They hand you a deal like it's a favor." He tapped his temple. "I've been in and out 20 years. Seen it 1,000 times." Darius lay on his bunk that night, listening to the prison's nighttime symphony, coughs, snores, the occasional shout. The weight of what he'd done pressed down on him. He traded his freedom for the illusion of mercy. And the worst part, he knew Renshaw would be doing the same thing to another poor black man tomorrow. 3 months into his sentence, a guard tossed a letter onto Darius's bunk during mail call. "Coleman, got some fan mail," the guard sneered before moving on. The envelope was plain white, the address handwritten in neat, precise letters. Darius turned it over, expecting another form letter from the VA or a notice about his benefits being cut. Instead, he found a name he didn't recognize, Elena Ruiz, the Beacon. Inside was a single sheet of paper. Asterisk Mr. Coleman, I'm a reporter investigating patterns of wrongful plea deals in the county public defender's office. Your case came across my desk. I'd like to talk if you're willing. Sincerely, Elena Ruiz, investigative reporter. The Beacon asterisk. Darius almost laughed. After months of being treated like garbage, someone actually wanted to hear his story. He reread the letter twice before folding it carefully and tucking it under his mattress. It took him 3 days to compose his reply, writing carefully on the prison's scratchy stationery. He kept it simple. Yes, he'd talk. Yes, he'd taken a plea deal. No, he wasn't guilty. 2 weeks later, he found himself in the prison's visitation room, sitting across from a petite woman with sharp brown eyes and a no-nonsense ponytail. She wore minimal makeup and a press badge clipped to her blazer. "Mr. Coleman," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for agreeing to meet." Her grip was firm, her gaze direct. Darius found himself sitting up straighter. Elena pulled out a notepad and a digital recorder. "I've been looking into Mark Renshaw's cases for the past 6 months. Of his last 34 defendants, 32 were black or Latino. 30 took plea deals." She flipped open a folder. "Including yours." Darius felt his pulse quicken. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying there's a pattern here. Renshaw works with the DA's office to clear cases quickly, and the people paying the price." She tapped his file. "They all look like you." For the first time since his arrest, Darius felt something he'd almost forgotten, hope. The article exploded across the city like a bomb. "Justice for sale! How the public defender's office pushes wrongful plea deals," ran on the front page of the Beacon, complete with graphs showing the racial disparities in Renshaw's cases and quotes from legal experts calling it systemic malpractice. Elena had included Darius's story prominently, the veteran abandoned by the system, coerced into admitting guilt for a crime he didn't commit. She'd even tracked down Miguel, the diner cook, who confirmed Darius's alibi. Within days, protests formed outside the courthouse. The ACLU got involved. The State Bar Association launched an investigation into Renshaw. And most importantly, a judge agreed to review Darius's case. The hearing lasted less than an hour. The new public defender, a fiery young black woman named Alicia Johnson, dismantled the prosecution's case point by point. The shaky ID, the lack of evidence, the pattern of coercion. When the judge, a silver-haired woman with piercing blue eyes, finally spoke, her words rang through the courtroom. "Mr. Coleman, your plea is vacated. The charges are dismissed with prejudice. Just like that, it was over. Darius stood on the courthouse steps afterward, squinting in the sunlight like a man emerging from a cave. Elena stood beside him, quietly sipping coffee from a paper cup. "What now?" she asked. Darius took a deep breath of free air. He thought of all the others still trapped in the system, the ones without journalists to fight for them. "Now," he said, "we find out how many more are buried under that bastard's caseload." And for the first time in a long time, he stood straight, ready to fight.